So I only have, I think, 30 minutes, so we're just going to jump right in. Or we can just talk baseball. We have any Blue Jays fans here? No? Okay, OSPO. Yeah, so going to talk about the journey of the OSPO at TD Bank. I've been there since January, so it's still, relatively new. Little brief introduction for me. Used to be a developer in a previous life, long time ago. They don't let me touch code anymore. Again, been at TD since January, so still relatively new. And you'll notice here a lot of Canadian content. There might be a lot of Canadian content in these slides. And I'm actually shocked how much Canadian content there is in the conference already. So does everyone know RBC is Royal Bank of Canada? Okay, and everyone knows BMO is Bank of Montreal, right? Okay, so anyways, there's a lot of Canadian content here. And one of the, I'd say consistencies with my career over the past few years is with open source, but also making things secure as well. And so for TD Bank, and TD Bank means Toronto Dominion, so again, more Canadian content there. So we are the 6th largest bank in North America. I know a lot of people probably don't know that because we're primarily on the East Coast, but it's true. And then we have 5,000 or 6,000 developers, which I was actually shocked when I joined as well. But the thing I really like, and I've learned over the past few months, is we contribute a lot, like 170 million to communities. And currently this does not include open source communities, but that's something I'm working on because I think our maintainers could leverage a bit of that $170 million, right? So yeah, so I'm going to work on that. And when I put this together, I didn't know Frank Nagel was going to have his slides, so he kind of stole my thunder a little bit. But this is a slide I like to talk about a lot with our leaders within the bank because it shows the value of open source, almost 9 trillion. But it also shows that we need people, we need an OSPO to help manage this because lots of value here, but there's a lot to manage as well. So agenda, again, we only have half an hour, so I'm going to go pretty quick. But we're just going to go over some definitions. And I did a similar talk a few weeks ago at an IBM conference. And one of the things that came up was, how did you get to the point before someone created an OSPO position? And so I added a slide with a brief history of what happened before I got there. And then going over some principles and patterns, because I love principles and patterns, because every company is different. And there's not like a one-size-fits-all with OSPOs. So I like to, if there's laws or patterns that can be reused, I like to do that. Again, balancing risk and innovation. We're a bank, financial institutions, it's all about risk. Lessons learned and then road ahead. So it's going to jump right in here. So open source, again, I'm preaching to the choir. But one of the things that I always like to say to about open source is it's not just about code, it's about people, and it's about working with those people as the code is being shared around the world. Open source program office, the way that I like to describe it is that team is meant for the company wherever it is to get the most out of open source. And also, because I'm in Canada most of the time, I like to say the OSPO is help to stick handle through some of those difficult, conversations. Hockey term there. That's why I have the Maple Leafs hockey stick there as well. So, and because everyone is mandated to have a slide on AI, here is my AI slide. And this is open source AI definition from the Open Source Initiative. And what I like about this is it doesn't talk about algorithms, it doesn't talk about specific models, it talks about systems. And an AI system is not just the model, it's the architecture, it's the data, it's the inferences, it's the weights, it's everything. So again, this is my AI slide. And one thing to keep in mind, everything that I'm talking about with the OSPO, not just for open source software, but for open source AI as well. So before the OSPO, again, I've been there since January, but what was the road to get to that point? And there was a lot of work that was done, a lot of reaching out to our executives. We had Brad, who runs the OSPO at IBM, come and talk at one of our TD conferences back in 2023. A lot of collaboration with FINOS, a lot of collaboration with IBM and Linux Foundation as well. And I don't know if everyone in this room has an OSPO already, but again, there is a playbook to work with your executives to get the word out, to get to the point that you can hire someone to run the OSPO. But it does take time, but there is help out there, and I think that's just the key thing I wanted to add on this slide. So again, 3 principles, and just think of these as things that can be applied in different situations, different companies. First one, and again, this is common sense. Again, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but use the basic principles of the open source community. So anyone spend a lot of time in like Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia? Anyone? So one of the things I noticed when I was growing up is I saw these beautiful barns, and they would just magically like be built, and you would see this community come in, and that's why I like the pattern, the concept of the barn raising, because it's all about collaboration, it's about shared work, it's about doing things as a group that couldn't be done by a single person, and it's also self-organized as well. And for this pattern, one of the things that I've applied is getting the word out early. This is what happens, in the barn raising scenarios. Like you get the word out. The community knows that someone needs to build a barn. So what I did the first month when I worked at TD is created an OSPO video that we shared at one of our conferences. So it's a video describing the OSPO, describing my mandate, and it was shared with like 15,000 people. And it was a great way to get the word out. And what I learned was there's a lot of people out there that wanted to help me that I had no idea who it was. But because I got the word out, they came and they started helping, just like when you raise a barn. Another thing, again, openness. I don't need to, talk about that too much, but there's the common idea that the more eyes you have, the bugs become less, right? And it's the key thing with the OSPO as well. When I've been rolling out, ideas for standards and controls and for our first contribution, I wanted as many eyes on this as possible. And that includes audit, it includes risk, includes legal as well. And one of the key ways that I've done that is we've set up a community of interest. We've had 2 so far. The last one was on AI. We had about 1,400 people join it. And I include everyone. So I don't just include engineers. I send the invite to audit, risk, legal, our business, everyone joins. Because I want it to be open. I don't want this just to be an engineering focused thing. Next thing, developer experience. This is a key thing that I preach constantly. And the thing that I like to say is there's no point if it takes 5 lines of code and you're trying to contribute and it takes 5 months to get that approved. That's just not going to fly. That's not a great developer experience. So everything that we have set up, or I would say, continue to set up when it comes to contributions, when it comes to consumption, let's make it as self-service as possible. Let's leverage platforming engineering concepts. And the other thing is we want to keep our developers in the flow. We don't want our developers to have a new tool or go through a new process. We want the contributions and even consumptions as much as possible to stay in the world that they're used to. Another key thing with keeping the flow is measure the right stuff. So this is ROI. And I actually didn't know that this was going to be like one of the main topics and the main focus for the next few years. But talking to executives about the ROI of having internal developers contribute to open source projects is probably the most difficult conversation I've had in my career. So if anyone in the audience has an answer to that, just raise your hand or tell me afterwards, because that is something I'm constantly trying to figure out how to share with business executive, why it's a good thing that we contribute and why we're proactive. Maybe Frank Nagel is going to share that model with us later this week, but that would be awesome. Next thing is do the heavy lifting early. So I work at a bank. Governance was the first thing I started tackling. And what I tried to do and what I've been trying to do since January is I want to make governance boring. I want to make open source governance and security and risk boring. So when I have those tough conversations, that there aren't, like red flags that come up. And, I think this is probably one of the most important things that I've done is I've turned open source contributions, and again, this is based on, lots of conversations based on, tackling this early. I've turned open source contributions less as a security issue and more as a process issue. And anyone who's worked at a bank for a long time, I used to be an auditor, it's much easier to discuss a process than it is about risk. So again, that's one of the key things I did. Tough conversations, again, having those tough conversations, especially with legal early, I can honestly say now that legal and risk and even the audit group, they're some of my biggest fans now. The legal department reaches out to me and said, "Hey, Mark, we want to talk about open source AI models and what's a good process for that." And it's one of the reasons why that happens is because I reached out to them early. And I had tough conversations with them early. So again, this is just a common pattern. May not be exactly what other people's experiences was, but for TD it worked. So now shifting from patterns and principles to, things like, balancing risk and innovation. I left this slide blank on purpose because depending on what bank you work at, depending on what company you work at, your risk appetite and your business focus is going to be different. You could be looking at things like agents, things like, setting up your agents to work like a service mesh. You could be looking at, just many other things that we're going to cover this week. But depending on your risk appetite, that may or may not be a focus, for innovation for the next year or so. So one of the things that I think is key for the OSPOs is trying to find the right balance of your risk appetite at your bank in the innovation and finding the right balance of what can you actually do? And finding that sweet spot is one of the things that that we've been working on. But it's going to be different for every company. So, there is no consistent sweet spot, at least that I've seen for OSPOs, especially within banks, because it's going to be different based on, the different risk appetite, business drivers. But again, lots of work needs to happen to understand what is your business focus for the next year or so, what is your innovation focus, and what is your risk appetite. So lessons learned. This is probably the most humbling part, at least for me personally, running an OSPO, because this is, I think, my 4th or 5th conference that I've been to, and the more conferences I go to, the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know a lot of stuff. I'm very ignorant. And so this has been very humbling for me because I'm going to leave this conference. You guys may all be excited and, like all the, I'm going to leave the conference thinking, wow, like I just don't know as much as I should know. And, two of the key things here is what I've learned, and, this has been painful, is be open to change. Strategies change, goals change, people change. And what I've learned is you have to embrace it when you're running an OSPO. And it's okay if what you wanted to do back in January for me personally is different than what I'm doing now. That's okay. So you have to be flexible. Other key thing is don't jeopardize long-term relationships for short-term wins. We did our first official TD open source contribution back in July. We've never done that before. We're a 150-year-old bank, and that was our first contribution. So, it was, hey, exciting. But I could have done that back in January and February and made a lot of people mad and raised a lot of red flags. But I didn't want to do that because I knew long-term those relationships were going to be important. Because I don't think, I'm ever going to be invited back here if we only did one open source contribution and that was it. That's not how you're successful. So again, don't jeopardize those relationships, especially with legal and risk and audit, to do things more quickly than you should. Again, that's just my experience. I don't know if that's everyone's experience, but found that really helpful. So the road ahead, again, we've made an open source contribution, yay. Where do we want to go from here? And I've leveraged this slide from my friends at Bloomberg. And I think it's a perfect view of everything I've been learning over the last 9 months, all of the other OSPOs I've been talking to, all of the other people who've been doing this for decades. It's very simple, but it shows where we all want to go. Like we all, and all the OSPOs I've been talking to, like we want to get to that leadership level. But everyone is different. I was talking to someone earlier. They've been doing open source contributions since like for the last 25 years. So they're further on this journey. There's other companies that I talk to that are already I would say at the end of the journey because it's always continuing, but they are leaders within this community. We at TD, we're kind of like in between the consumption participation phase there. But I think this captures just what that journey looks like. I haven't talked to anyone over the last 9 months who said they've gone backwards on this. So like as you see the arrow, it's continually going forward. So that's very encouraging to me because I want to make sure everything that we're doing, if we get to that strong contribution phase, we're not going to go backwards. But I don't think that's how this community works, which is very encouraging to me. Just do a time check here. Okay, we got a few minutes. So usually I don't add in any slides at the last minute. But last night, do we have any baseball fans here? Any Toronto fans? Toronto Blue Jays fans? So George Springer, seventh inning, home run, like yay Toronto. So go Jays. And usually I don't do this. My wife wanted me to add this on Friday, but I said there's no way the baseball gods will curse me if I do this, and I'll curse the Blue Jays. So I added it this morning. But go Blue Jays. And just thank you to everyone for joining. I know there's lots of interesting sessions going on now, so thank you for joining. And again, just reach out over LinkedIn if you have any follow-up questions or ever want to chat. And again, I love when people connect to me over LinkedIn because they have questions for me, but they don't realize I'm usually going to have 20 more questions for them. So hopefully that's okay. So I think, I got a few minutes for questions if there are any. Yes. Yes.
So going back a few slides, you said you have innovation with risk and then the sweet spot. What sort of things are you taking from your lessons learned to really kind of start shaping that innovation piece with open source with the business partners?
So I could go into my old audit days of being an auditor and, you know, mapping out risk and all that, but I won't. One of the things that I've done to help balance it is talk to a lot of our business partners and find out, you know, what is their focus? What is on their, you know, like the list of things they need to do to get their bonuses next year, for example. And what I then do is ask the question, like, what's holding you back from doing that? And I think, you know, a good, you know, generic example could be, you know, like AI agents, right? Like, how many people have a mandate at their company for AI? You know, I think, yeah, everyone does. So, so again, you know, taking a generic approach to that is, you know, you ask the question from the business, like, okay, great, like you have a mandate, like what is your mandate? And then, you know, either they say, you know, we need to automate X number of processes or we need to save X number of money. And then you have the conversation with them from a risk standpoint of, you know, what's actually holding you back? Is it, you know, is it security? Is it governance? Is it processes? Is it audit? Is it regulators? And what you can do if it is an audit or a risk or controls issue is then you start asking the question, like, is it a standard? Is it a control that's holding you back? Is it, you know, a regulation? Is it the risk appetite of the company? And then once you start like mapping everything, then you get to that sweet spot. And then what you can then start to do, and you know, this is a similar process we used for the first contribution we made, where, you know, there was a mandate from my VP that said, you know, you have to do a contribution. And then, you know, from the risk standpoint, I talked to all the risk people. And then, you know, we met in the middle and decided on, okay, this is, you know, something that's valuable to the bank. And again, this could be general, like any business driver, has to be value to the bank, but that value can't supersede the bank's risk appetite. So any innovation that business wants, you have to understand what the risk appetite is of the company and like map it out to standards and controls. And then you make any adjustments so you get to the sweet spot. So that's what I would use as a pattern for any, you know, business driver in any innovation is like, you can't do anything that's going to go against the reputation of the company. You can't do anything that your regulators are basically saying you can't be a bank, you know, anymore because you've done this. But it takes time because you have to understand not only the risk, but you also have to understand the business driver and the technology behind it. So I don't know if that answered your question, but okay.
Oh, I was going to be loud enough.
Oh, okay. Okay. Sorry.
No, follow-up question was, there a standard articulation of that? Because what you described is like, okay, that's a business case at the contribution level, weighing pros and cons. Was there a formal articulation to say, here's what we'd like to do, these things? You know, was there a way of evidencing that other than doing it as just a one-off? Did you standardize how you evidence the trade-off?
Yes. So that for the open source contribution, what I'd say the process for that was two steps. One was looking at existing standards to see if there's anything covered in it that I can leverage. And there wasn't. Like we had standards that mentioned things like licensing. We had standard things, you know, that mentioned things like, you know, software development, best practices, but there wasn't anything that mentioned the open source contribution. So that was the first step. The second step was, how do I fill that gap? And one of the things that we did is we created a draft open source standard just to get it into the process. And again, that was based on examples from the Linux Foundation, Capital One, like there's a GitHub page that has a bunch of examples. So we created that draft standard, but then again, I'm an ex-auditor, so one of the things that I did is I mapped the processes of an open source contribution to existing controls, right? So, like you need to do a code review. It's like, great, we have a, control for a code review. You need to do things like, make sure that this open source project, like is a license that we're okay with. It's like, okay, great. Like, we have a process for that. And then, sorry? Yeah, so the CLA check, that was interesting. One of the other things that we leverage, and this may be different for other companies, is we didn't have a concept of that, but we had a social media policy. And within the social media policy, it didn't go into that much depth of having the internal CLA. But it went into best practices for how do you, how do you behave in the external community, right? So we use that as kind of like the internal CLA, but then like we looked to see if there was an external one for the project, and we weren't comfortable enough to be able to sign something like that, so we didn't, pick a project that had that. And then the other thing that we did, and again, this may be like overkill, but one of the things that we have been doing with the OSPO is kind of over pivoting on the governance. We ran what we called like a maturity assessment on that open source project. And what I mean by a maturity assessment, it's like, okay, did you do your license review? Yes. And then the other questions we asked was, okay, like how many people internally are getting benefits from this? So we got that. And then we looked at, is there any like security scans being done of this things? Like, so we did that. We looked at that, and so it was a pretty detailed like assessment of that project, which may be overkill. I don't know if other companies do that, but it helped because we didn't have a standard yet. By next year, we're going to have a standard, so it'll be easier. But those are the steps that we had to take, like when. Like if you don't have a standard, then you kind of have to create a hopefully repeatable process that like handles things that your standard would have. I don't know if that answered your question. I think I'm 1 minute over, but any other questions or? Nope. Okay. And if there's any other questions, just reach out over LinkedIn or grab me during the conference too. Yeah.